Welcome to the Blessing and Cursing Podcast. As always, I'm your host. Kind of running a skeleton crew today, so to speak. So please bear with me. This was very unexpected. But I have been doing a study here lately. And of course, comments are always open. I still can see those if anybody has anything to hop on there and add to it. But I remember back before we ever started doing guests, Philip and I did kind of a overview of Job, and I've done another personal deep dive study into Job, and I feel like we kind of fell up short. That, or God has given some more revelation to me since then, so I wanted to kind of revamp that. And this isn't to rewrite the book, this isn't to tell you anything profound, this is just some things that I kind of picked up on in my most recent reading of it. I actually just finished it this morning. So it's very fresh on my mind. We start off the book of Job very plainly. Everybody that has done any studying on it is aware. We hear Job described as a man that was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. So I did some research on what that meant, because it seemed very suspicious to me that Job was described as being upright, and specifically the blameless and perfect. And the way that I guess found in the study from the words that were used and the implication, it's not that Job was sinless, just that Job was had good morals, good ethics, if that makes any sense to you. And it's not because of necessarily what he was doing, but it's because of that second part. He was perfect and upright because he feared God and eschewed evil. That tells us that Job's character isn't that he is a perfect man. He wasn't Christ, but that he was somebody that was actively trying to please God. He was actively trying to do the will of God. He was trying to stay away from evil, and he was trying to keep his family away from evil. In that he wanted to love God. He feared and revered him. We see that Job was a very wealthy man, and we hear a great reference to what he has in his possession. The crazy thing that really has stuck with me through this entire study is that we don't read that Job was an Israelite or a Hebrew or really what Job was. We hear about where he's from, which isn't any of the settlements of God's chosen people. The timeline on Job is kind of shaky. We're not really sure a lot on when Job was written or necessarily who wrote Job. We don't know if it was a tale or not. A lot of people like to read Job as like a literary device, like a poem, a minor epic, if you will. I like to think that it's a real thing. And it doesn't read like something that couldn't happen. It reads like something that very well makes sense to happen. But depending on your outlook on that, it has two different meanings. If it's a literary device, if it's a poem or an epic, well then the meeting with Satan in heaven could have a very different meaning from like an actual literal theological concept of Satan being able to have that conversation with God. Who Satan is in this is entirely up for debate. There's a school of thought that Satan and Lucifer are two different beings. There's a school of thought that it's the same guy. That has something to do with it. That's not really what I want to talk about. I want to focus more on the overall story instead of those minute details, though. So, shortly after we hear about how good Job was and the things that God had given him, we hear that Satan comes up and says, well, what if, I don't know that there is anybody that great. And God says, what about Job? Of course, Satan gives him the classic test of, well, if you took away the things you've given him, then he would turn against you. So God allows Satan to go and to attack Job and to kill his family and take away basically his wealth and power. And he's essentially just left with him and his wife. And we see that from that, Job continues to praise and worship God. When we first hear about Job and his family, we hear that he has a great many kids and that he would have feasts with them and he would have dinners and whatnot. We don't know what that looked like. We don't know if it was a party, if it was just like a regular I go on Sunday nights to have dinner with my family. But we know that when Job would wake up in the mornings, he would give sacrifices on behalf of his children just in case they had sinned against God or just in case they had cursed God. That tells me that Job had an intimate relationship with the Father. That shows that Job cared, that Job wasn't just a regular guy that thought he knew, that Job actually participated in this. What blows my mind is that with him not being of an Israel tribe, it's assumed this was written around the time of Abraham and Isaac. Where did he learn this from? I think that this is a really great example of showing that God existed outside of the Bible record. Because remember, the recording of the Bible was Jewish people writing Jewish history. God exists outside of Jewish history. God exists outside of time. So I believe that somehow, at least for Job, God spoke to him. God revealed truth to him. Somehow, Job knew this because he was doing the same sacrifices that the Israelites were doing at the time. I find that very fascinating personally. So after his children are killed and all of his wealth is taken, we have in chapter 1, verse 20, Then Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell down on the ground and worshipped. Said, Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Now that wording is very important, as we'll get to later. He did not charge God foolishly. We see that when Job's entire wealth and family essentially was destroyed, he naturally was mourning. He rent his clothes, he shaved his head, he fell down on the ground, but he worshipped God. He was not angry at God. He did not turn his back against God. He worshipped God, and he said basically, I came into this world with nothing. I'm going to leave with nothing. It's your choice to give this to me or not. That's an astounding concept for us as believers today to try to understand. Far too often we find ourselves, as soon as trouble starts, we just throw the whole thing out and we start to panic about that. We've not lost our entire wealth and our children in one fell swoop because of this, but we take those little minor grievances. And I'm not saying that our problems aren't big. They're exactly as big as they feel to us, and they're that big to God. He cares about those things. Don't mishear me there. But we hear that Job had suffered a loss greater than I could imagine, and he still worshipped God. That's encouraging to me. That gives me a good example to go forward. Satan comes back to God in chapter 2, and he kind of gives the same speech of, Job's really only in this because you're taking care of him. Yeah, he lost his stuff, but he's still fine. So God relinquishes a little bit more of the stronghold around Job and allows Satan to attack Job personally. The only modicum of security is that he can't kill him, but he can afflict him. So now Job is covered in sores, boils. He was already mourning and weeping by himself, but now he's in pain physically from that. And we see that he's out on this hill. And in chapter 2, verse 9, Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. But he said unto her, Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did Job not sin with his lips. So his wife sees this, and, it's kind of an afterthought, but Job's wife also lost her wealth and her power and her children in this. So we see right off the bat that she's handling this differently than Job. And then when she sees that Job, her husband, is now personally afflicted, she says, just give up. I don't understand why you're still worshiping God. And Job answers very rightly, how can we expect to receive only good things in life? We have to have evil to also understand good. Now, I'm not going to make any theological precepts about where punishment and evil and wickedness in our lives come from. We see here that this isn't necessarily God's hand doing this, but it's Satan, but it is God allowing Satan to do this. And I also think sometimes things just happen. But how can we as people expect to never have something bad happen, never have a bad day, never have a bad experience? If we have good, then we have to have bad to go along with that. You can't really have one without the other. You can't have light without dark in the world, because there wouldn't be anything to contrast that with. So then we have Job's three friends, The popular story that you hear a lot of times is that Job's 3 friends are jerks. After reading this again, and I don't know what we said the first time, but after reading this again, I don't agree. And I'll tell you why. In verse 11, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. When they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept. They rent every one his mantle, and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Now, whatever happens after this point, just the fact that they decided to come from their places, it said that they weren't from the same area. They came from different regions. They were different groups of people. They made an appointment to come together, the 3 of them, to come and to support and comfort their friend. And that was their intention. It does say that they were there to comfort him and to mourn with him. And when they get there and they said they knew him not, to me that says that he was so disfigured from these sores that they couldn't even tell that was their friend Job. He was in such a state from the last time they had seen him, he was unrecognizable. And so they began to mourn and weep with him. It said that they also rent their clothes, and that they also put ashes on their head, and that they also fell down on the ground weeping and mourning for and with their friend. That is a friend. That is a sign of friendship. That is a lot more than what we could see happening to there. Oh, sorry, it just popped up. I didn't see that through there. There's also something on the screen, Savannah dear, so I can't really comment to that just yet. But I do see that you sent something there. So Job's friends do come in the beginning with the best of intentions, and I still believe that what they do is with the best of intentions, but they have been misguided by poor theology, which is something that we as the church still face today, and I will go a little bit further. In chapter 3, Job finally speaks after 7 days of mourning, and he curses his birth, and he longs for his death. It's very interesting to note that Job does not take matters into his own hands. He does not take his own life in this instance, as I would argue a good portion of us would do, but instead Job just longs that God would do it himself. I've spoken with a great number of people that have had different depression issues or different issues with their mental health, and there is a desire to pass, but they don't want to do it themselves. They would prefer that it be on God's terms. And I think that really speaks to, again, the character of Job, that while his ultimate goal would be that he perish so he doesn't have to suffer anymore, he wants it to be God's will. He wants it to be God's hand that does it. To me, that speaks volumes of the character of Job, that he's still a faithful and just man in God's eyes. And the fact that it said that in chapter 2 that with all this he did not sin in his lips, with his lips whenever he responded to his wife, that shows me that Job is still faithful to God in this. He's confused, absolutely. He's mourning, he's depressed, he's sad, he's all of those things, but he's still faithful to God. I don't believe that Job's big problem, I don't believe that this all came about just to show that Job was prideful. I believe that this was brought about because God allowed it to happen. I think that Job did have pride. I think that we all have pride, but I think that the greater issue in this wasn't Job's pride as much as it was Job's false sense of knowledge on God. But I'll get into that as we keep going as well. So then we have his friends begin to question him. And from chapter 4, give me just a second. I've got to clear the screen so I can actually see what's happening on here. Okay, there was a pop-up over there. Savannah said, my issue is my bad days set me so far back, and I get caught up feeling sorry for myself, when instead I should have faith that God will get me through it, just like he has every other time. You can feel emotions and question while also having faith. Absolutely, and that is one of the keys to the book of Job, is that we can feel, and we can have doubts, and that doesn't make it sinful. It makes us human. God expects those things, but he wants us to have faith through that. You can be unsure and still trust God. He would absolutely prefer unwavering faith. We see that. But God is a God of mercy and love, and he allows us to have that. So in chapters 4 through, I believe, 25, his friends begin to take turns and speak to him. And largely, they're misguided, but they have good intentions. The moral and the gist of what it is that they say is they continue to uplift and praise God. They continue to assert God's sovereignty and his dominance and his power, his authority, and everything about God, but they do tend to leave out the grace and the mercy and the hope of God, really. And they fall into the same theology that I hear time and time again from people, in this idea that God actively punishes the wicked here on earth every time, and he actively lifts up and blesses and gives to those that are faithful or are repentant to him in this time, in this life. That's just not true. And scripturally, we see that that's not true. If every evil person got a mountain of sin to them, then there would be no like rich, ruling, shady celebrity whatevers that are going on in the news. These people wouldn't have power and authority, because by that same standard, every time that they were to sin, God would knock them back down. And then every person that's ever done anything good would be uplifted and blessed and have all of these grandiose ideas and these things that we look for. It's bad theology that comes from the book of Job. My fear is that there have been people that have read Job and have taken every word of it as truth. We've said this several times here on the podcast, and it's upset quite a few people because I don't believe they fully understand what we're saying. So let me do my best to say this again. The majority of what Eliphaz and Bildad and the other fellow whose name I can't remember top of head right now say is false. It's wrong. But it's in the Bible. So it's still wrong, but it is in the Bible. So it is something worth reading. You understand? So when we say not everything in the Bible is true, that's an example. We're not saying that like the faith isn't true. We're saying that the Bible is a recording of things people have said, and people can be wrong. Okay? So a good majority of what the friends say to Job in these next chapters is patently wrong. Because what they do is they ascribe motive to God that's not there. They ascribe a dogma to God that is not there. And they ascribe a blame to Job that is not there. Job was not punished in this book because of his sin. God says himself that he is blameless, upright, and perfect in his ways. Okay? Now that's again not God saying that he is sinless. That is God saying that he is a just man. That is God saying that he is ethical, that he has a heart for God and he cares for him. And we see that later on, Job's mind does start to kind of twist. And that's kind of where the issue comes from. So his friends continue to go on. Bildad talks to him after that. And every time, so they'll talk and then they let Job speak. And they talk and they let Job speak. And eventually Job gets fed up with it. And I find it very funny. Because Job gets fed up with it and he says that they are poor comforters or something. I'm sorry, I again didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this. I'm sure of that. In Job chapter 13, I have this highlighted here. This must have really stuck out to me. He said, "Lo, mine eye hath seen all this. Mine ear hath heard and understood it. What ye know, the same do I know also. I am not inferior unto you. Surely I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. But ye are forgers of lies, ye are all physicians of no value. Oh, that ye would altogether hold your peace, and it should be your wisdom. Hear now my reasoning, and hearken unto the pleadings of my lips." So this is Job's response after all three friends have said something. And that really speaks to me in that, because he's telling these guys that they feel that they have some type of moral or aged superiority over Job. And he's saying, I know exactly what you know. We have the same level of knowledge in God. And what you are telling me is lies. You're forging these lies, he says. He's saying you're creating them. And that is true. As the friends are speaking, they're kind of poking and prodding and saying, Job, if you would just confess your sins, God would redeem you and bless you again. God would lift you back up. And Job is continuing to say, I really wish God would reveal my sin to me. You see, the entire time Job's response is, if I knew the sin, I would repent of the sin. If I was aware, I would get rid of it. And he prays several times that God either reveal it to him or just to take his life away, because he doesn't want to go through this anymore. Everything that I read about Job tells me that that's an accurate statement, because we saw that Job was worried about his children's unknown sin, that he would commit sacrifices for them so that they might not have a penalty laid to their charge. So when Job prays and he says all this, I believe him. Again, Job did sin. He was not perfect in that sense, but God himself said that he was perfect and upright in every way, because he feared God and he showed evil. That means that he respected and revered God and did his level best to refrain from evil. His friends lay these things to his charge. But I just find that hilarious. 13:2 is one of my favorite verses, because there's a lot of times in life when you're talking to people, and I know that I've done this myself, so forgive me if you've been on the receiving end of this, but people tend to talk down to people when they think they know the truth better than someone, and that what you know, the same do I know, also I am not inferior to you, is very funny to me. Savannah said, I believe God led examples of situations we would go through into the Bible just so that it could speak to us specifically. In real life, we would have people speaking to us like that and then being wrong. Does that make sense? Absolutely. The majority of Scripture is examples of what can go wrong and how we make it go wrong for that. So yeah, there's a good chance that the whole reason that we have Job isn't just to show that, hey, you're going to suffer in this life, but to show that this may be how your friends treat you in this instance, as a warning for us. It's very easy whenever someone's going through something to want to be the good Christian and come to help them and then give advice. And I really want to warn against giving unsolicited advice. It's great if someone asks for it specifically, but if someone's just having an issue and you come in and start telling them what they need to do, I know personally that makes me not want to do that. The worst thing that I hear on a regular basis is you need to or you should do X, Y, and Z. That's just naturally going to make me not want to do that. Like, it gives us a real life perspective, not just something they went through. BC. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I believe that this story is a real life example of something that happened in someone with a relationship to God. I almost ascribe Job to have the same, like, David type of title of a man after God's own heart, because Job's actions speak that he is trying to get closer to God. So Job continues to speak, and it's very it's very interesting to see that everyone that's speaking talks about God's glory. They talk about God's power and God's sovereignty. All of the friends do. Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz. And Job does as well. They talk about how great and powerful God is. Where they start to be led astray is they start to ascribe things that they think about God as truths about God. And we all do this. And I really think that the biggest warning in Job is that. It's not that, like, oh, be careful being prideful. It's be careful ascribing details to God that aren't details of God. Hopefully that makes sense to you. I think that this is very neat as well, because in chapter 16, I believe that this is the chapter here. Let me just read this real quick. Job answered and said, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are ye all. That's what I was looking for. Miserable comforters, he said. Shall vain words have an end, or what emboldeneth thee that thou answerest? I could also speak as ye do, if your soul were in my soul's stead. I could heap up words against you and shake mine head at you. But I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the moving of my lips should assuage your grief. Though I speak, my grief is not assuaged, and though I forbear, what am I ceased? But now he hath made me weary. Thou hast made desolate all my company, and thou hast filled me with wrinkles, which is a witness against me, and my leanness rising up in me beareth witness to my face. He teareth me in his wrath, who hateth me. He gnasheth upon me with his teeth. Mine enemy sharpeneth his eyes upon me. They have gaped upon me with their mouth. They have smitten me upon the cheek reproachfully. They have gathered themselves together against me. God hath delivered me to the ungodly, and turned me over to the hands of the wicked. I was at ease, but he hath broken me asunder. He hath also taken me by my neck, and shakeneth me to pieces, and set me up for his mark. His archers compass me round about. He cleaveth my reins asunder, and doth not spare. He poureth out my gall upon the ground. He breaketh me with breach upon breach. He runneth upon me like a giant. I have sewed sackcloth upon my skin, and defiled my horn in the dust. My face is foul with weeping, and on my eyelids is the shadow of death. Not for any injustice in mine hands, also my prayer is pure. O earth, cover not thou my blood, and let my cry have no place. Also now behold, my witness is in heaven, and my record is on high. But my friends scorn me, but mine eye poureth out tears unto God. Oh, that one might plead for a man with God, as a man pleadeth for his neighbor. When a few years are come, then shall I go the way whence I shall not return. I don't know if that means the same to you as it means to me, but this tells me here that Job has started to kind of come mentally undone in one aspect, but he has a resounding faith in another. You remember the story of Abraham and Isaac when Abraham was told by God to sacrifice Isaac, and Abraham takes Isaac up there, and he tells the servants that me and the boy will return. He goes up there, and with no hesitation, he attempts to sacrifice his son, and his hand is stayed by God. That told me in that moment that Abraham had full intention of sacrificing his son, but at that same note, he knew that he and the son would come back down. So that tells me that Abraham may have had some pre-idea of resurrection before there had ever been a resurrection. Job has the same knowledge, and we'll read that here in a second. But in this one, we hear that Job has a witness in heaven, that Job believes that there is somebody that is speaking on his behalf to God in this. This tells me greatly that Job has a concept of a Messiah. He has a concept of Christ before Christ is ever mentioned in a nation that Christ probably wouldn't have ever been spoken about at the time. We have the idea that some of the older prophets, Abraham and them, had seen a glimpse of what was to come down the line. You know, Abraham was to be a father of many nations, and that by his seed the world may be redeemed. But we see that Abraham only ever got to see a few children and grandchildren. I believe that something has happened in Job. Someone has shown him, he has heard, he has had a vision, but he has seen this concept of Christ witnessing for him in heaven. But we also see that just like any other person, he gets some things wrong. And the beginning of that sounds like he is attributing all of his woes to God. And he starts to kind of believe and convince himself, whether this is just circumstantial or because he's following what his friends tell him, that all of these things that are coming to him are coming to him from God, that God has turned his back on Job, or is punishing Job, or is allowing these things to come to Job. In the first 5 or 6 verses there, I think this is really good just to keep in the back of our minds whenever we go to speak to somebody else. Whenever he says, I have heard many such things, miserable comforters are ye all. Shall vain words have an end, or what emboldeneth thee that thou answerest? I mean, have you ever been a miserable comforter? Have you ever been trying to talk to somebody and you've made the situation worse? Because Job's saying here that you're miserable. You're a miserable comforter, and that he would rather you not speak. And he said, I could speak as you do. If you were in my position, I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you. Listen, telling somebody that they've done something wrong in this instance, whether they have or haven't, doesn't help. It's very simply them saying, Job saying you're not doing any good here. If I had broken my arm and then someone comes to me and is like, hey, you knew you were going to break your arm by doing X, Y, and Z thing, that's not helping my broken arm in that moment. I would strengthen you with my mouth, he said, and the moving of my lips should assuage your grief. Though I speak, my grief is not assuaged. Though I forbear, what am I eased? He said, if you're truly here, if you're really doing God's will, if you're really here to help and be a comforter, you're supposed to comfort me. You're supposed to help me out. You're not doing any of that. You're not helping. In 17, my breath is corrupt, my days are extinct, the graves are ready for me. Are there not mockers with me? And doth not mine eye continue in their provocation? I really love that when Job responds, most of the time he responds kind of to his friends and then very quickly just talks about his friends to God or seemingly nobody. Because at this point his friends are still there, but he's just like, I'm surrounded by provocateurs. I'm surrounded by people that are attacking me in every instance. The friends are there like, yeah, you've sinned. Savannah said, I would have just took that as Abraham lied. I like the thought that he had such peace and faith in God that he knew God would see him through it by giving his son back. That's the way I've always read it, is that Abraham had full faith that either God was going to provide a sacrifice, which he did tell Isaac God would provide a sacrifice, or that his son was going to come back down the mountain with him one way or another. Now, there's no hard, fast truth that says that's what Abraham believed, because Moses wrote this several hundred years after this. But that's always been my idea. That's always been my belief, and it shows a great faith. And I believe it's the same faith that Job had here. In verse 3 of chapter 17, lay down now. Put me in a surety with thee. Who is he that will strike hands with me? For thou hast hid their heart from understanding. Therefore shalt thou not exalt them. He that speaketh flattery to his friends, even the eyes of his children shall fail. He hath made me also a byword of the people, and aforetime I was as a tabret. My eye also is dim by reason of sorrow, and all my members are as a shadow. Upright men shall be astonished at this, and the innocent shall stir himself up against the hypocrite. The righteous also shall hold on his way, and he that hath clean hands shall be stronger and stronger. But as for you all, do ye return and come now, for I cannot find one man among you. My days are past, my purposes are broken off, even the thoughts of my heart. They change the night into day, the light is short because of darkness. If I wait, the grave is mine house. I have made my bed in the darkness. I have said to corruption, thou art my father. To the worm, thou art my mother and my sister. And where is now my hope? As for my hope, who shall see it? They shall go down to the bars of the pit, when our rest together is in the dust. I'm not sure top of my head where it's at, but there is a passage that I will do my best to find without just taking up a bunch of time of awkward silence here, where Job does speak of another life after the grave, which doesn't really make a lot of sense and doesn't really matter unless you understand other religions' beliefs in a lot of instances. Now, I don't know what Job really ascribed to. He wasn't a Jew, but he did follow the same God. But I know that the Jews back in the day had several different beliefs of death, and not that there was what we think of as heaven and hell, but there was a place where every soul went. We can refer to it as Abraham's bosom or Sheol, but it's this idea that there is an afterlife of kind of a holding cell. Kind of an idea of purgatory, but without the trials of cleansing for sin, but I think that Job speaks about that to an extent. Then of course his friends go back through another one there, and then in 19, I'm going to read this. I think this may be it. Guys, bear with me. I appreciate you being with me this long. Job answered and said, how long will ye vex my soul, and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times have ye reproached me. Ye are not ashamed that ye make yourselves strange to me. And be it indeed that I have erred, mine error remaineth with myself. If indeed ye will magnify yourselves against me, and plead against me my reproach, Know now that God hath overthrown me, and hath compassed me with his net. Behold, I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there is no judgment. To me, that really speaks that Job is saying that, if I have sinned, all you're doing is making it worse. It is my sin that's on me. If it is my sin and it is something that I have done and it's within me, you're not really helping. And I have cried out to God to reveal it to me, or to change it, or to fix this. He's really saying here, and this is part of what gets Job in trouble, is he's kind of putting out the ultimatum of, God, if I have sinned, then show me my sin, show me my punishment, and give me my judgment. And when there is no judgment that comes forward, his judgment being his death is what he's asking. Whenever there is no death judgment that's put forward, it kind of makes it to where either Job is wrong or God is wrong. And we see in the end that that's really where God's upsetness comes from in his speech. Because if Job is saying that my judgment will be my death if I've done anything wrong, but I'm still alive here, so I haven't done anything wrong, and God's been punishing me, then that makes God into a liar. That makes God unjust. That's simply not true. Job doesn't have the benefit we do of being able to read chapters 1 and 2 and learning about Satan's test. If he did, he would change his tune quite a bit here. But instead, he lays it out, and he says that God is doing this to me, but I've done nothing wrong, so he has to stop, or he has to pass judgment and show me. We'll go a little bit further. So he goes through, 1 through 20, and he again is speaking very poetically about how his skin cleaveth to his bones, and that the people hate him now, and that he has become worthless. In 21, have pity upon me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. Why do ye persecute me as God, and are not satisfied with my flesh? Oh, that my words are now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book. And I wrote a little note there, and I said, they are. That would make Job feel good, probably. That they were graven with an iron pen in lead in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand in the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. But ye should say, why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in me? Be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishments of the sword, that ye may know there is a judgment. That's exactly what I was looking for. I don't know if you picked up the same thing that I'm getting on there, but Job is mentioning that his Redeemer lives, and that he shall stand in the latter day upon the earth. That Redeemer is the same witness that Job was talking about in 17. That Redeemer is Christ. How did Job understand Christ? Because he had such a close relationship with God that Christ was revealed to him in that. He said, my Redeemer liveth, and he shall stand in the latter day upon the earth. Job is speaking revelatory. He's speaking about stuff that John wrote about, that the Redeemer would stand on the earth in the latter day. And then he says, though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God. That is Job speaking of a bodily resurrection, not just a spiritual, but a physical manifestation, body resurrection. This is the first in history that we hear about this in the context of God, of Jehovah, of Yahweh, of Christ, of the God that we worship. I believe this was probably written around the same time as Abraham, Isaac, in that era. And he's got a greater knowledge of God than they do. Yes, we did just talk about Abraham talking about a resurrection. And he did get to see, I believe, in the future and kind of see this idea of the Messiah. But Job is doing this strictly based off his relationship with God, not things that were passed down from these relationships that Abraham had. This is a personal thing. This is mind-blowing to me. This is the biggest thing that I got out of all of this, was that Job had this kind of relationship with God. So then, the friends come back, and now they're getting a lot more upset. because they're getting to the point that they're seeing that Job is committing blasphemy as far as they're concerned. This idea of a heavenly redeemer, of a witness in heaven, of someone that is going to be able to come back fully in the flesh is obscure to them because the resurrection, a resurrection, had not happened yet. The idea was insane. They believed, which horrible religion, that when you died you were just dead. Didn't matter. Yeah, there's a God, there's all this, but when you die you're just dead. What a sad life to live. What a worthless life to live. Without the hope of redemption, without the hope of resurrection, there is no life worth living. Because without the resurrection, there's no relationship with God after that. So they go back and forth, and the friends start to get a little bit more aggressive with him, and they start to get a little more, like, Job, I think you're wrong on this one. And then Job has a few... Could be. We could say, Savannah said, so this is the first, so is that the first prophecy of Jesus coming? There's a chance, historically speaking, there's a lot of people that believe that God did kind of reveal human history to Adam whenever sin came into the world, but there's nothing biblical on that. That just came from literary works. And then there's this idea that Abraham did get to see this idea of being the father of many nations, of getting to see this redemption that comes through there. But Job seems to be the first one that came to that externally, if that makes sense. We don't read that God gave this information to Job like he gave it to Abraham and Moses and the rest of the patriarchs. This seems like Job kind of came to this conclusion on his own, which was a right conclusion to come to. Maybe, just without the name Jesus, because that was a Jewish name, and Job wasn't Jewish. So then we go forward again, and in 29, I'm just going to read probably chapters 29 and 30. Consider this a free Bible audiobook on Job. Moreover, Job continued his parable and said, "Oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God preserved me, when his candle shined upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness, as I was in the days of my youth, when the secret of God was upon my tabernacle, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were about me, when I washed my steps with butter, and the rock poured me out rivers of oil. When I went out to the gate through the city, when I prepared my seat in the street, the young men saw me and hid themselves, and the aged rose and stood up. The princes refrained talking and laid their hand on their mouth. The nobles held their peace, their tongue cleaved to the roof of their mouth. When the ear heard me, then it blessed me, and when the eye saw me, it gave witness to me. Because I delivered the poor that cried, and the fatherless, and him that had none to help him. The blessing of him that was ready to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My judgment was as a robe and a diadem. I was eyes to the blind, and feet was I to the lame. I was a father to the poor, and the cause which I knew not I searched out. And I brake the jaws of the wicked, and plucked the spoil out of his teeth. Then I said, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply my days as the sand. My root was spread out by the waters, and the dew lay all night upon my branch. My glory was fresh in me, and my bow was renewed in my hand. Unto me men gave ear, and waited, and kept silence at my counsel. After my words they spake not again, and my speech dropped upon them. And they waited for me, as for in the rain. And they opened their mouth wide, as for the latter rain. If I laughed on them, they believed it not, and the light of my countenance they cast not down. I chose out their way, and sat chief, and dwelt as a king in the army, as one that comforteth mourners." So that's all of 29. Savannah said, so his friends believed in God, but no life after death. Yes, people still do that today. There are people that still have this idea of Christianity in these very obscure sects that believe that there is no life after death. And I believe that it was the Sadducees in Scripture. There's the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They were both Jews. They were both priests. They were both categories of religious leaders. And the Pharisees did believe in this idea of some kind of heaven, but the Sadducees did not believe in a physical life after this. They believed that it was just straight one and done. very pitiable existence. Almost makes more sense to be a Gentile than to believe that. So yes, his friends did believe in God, but no life after death. There is also the question of how his friends had this knowledge of God. And of course, we can argue the point that God puts the knowledge of Him in our hearts. He has carved His law on our hearts. Nature speaks of God's existence. We have verses like this that bring that to mind. But we also see that across the world that there are many gods that people worship in there. So it seems that Job and his friends did worship the true God. They just didn't have maybe the best understanding of Him. Again, it's a huge theological thing, very interesting to look at, but we don't have the history of Job and his people. So we don't have a written record of what they actually believed outside of this. Very good point, though. So chapter 29 is Job speaking of where he was. And he's talking about not only the power that he had, but the way that people behaved around him, and how he was able to bring joy to people, and how he was respected, and how he was held above this higher standard of most men. And then we see that Job turns it around in 30 and describes his feeling now. But now they that are younger than I have me in derision, whose fathers I would have disdained to have set with the dogs of my flock. Yea, whereto might the strength of their hands profit me, in whom old age has perished. For want and famine they were solitary, fleeing into the wilderness, in former time desolate and waste, who cut up mallows by the bushes and juniper roots for their meat. They were driven forth from among men, they cried after them as after a thief. To dwell in the cliffs of the valleys, in caves of the earth, and in the rocks. Among the bushes they brayed, under the nettles they were gathered together. They were children of fools, yea, children of base men. They were viler than the earth. And now am I their song, yea, I am their byword. They abhor me, they flee far from me, and spare not to spit in my face, because he hath loosed my cord, and afflicted me. They have also let loose the bridle before me. Upon my right hand rise the youth, they push away my feet, and they raise up against me the ways of their destruction. They mar my path, they set forward my calamity, they have no helper. They came upon me as a wide breaking in of waters. In the desolation they rolled themselves upon me. Terrors are turned upon me. They pursue my soul as the wind, and my welfare passeth away as a cloud. And now my soul is poured out upon me. The days of affliction have taken hold upon me. My bones are pierced in me in the night season, and my sinews take no rest. By the great force of my disease is my garment changed. It bindeth me about as the collar of my coat. He hath cast me into the mire, and I am become like ash, and dust and ashes. I cry unto thee, and thou doest not hear me. I stand up, and thou regardest me not. Thou art become cruel to me. With thy strong hand thou opposest thyself against me. Thou liftest me up to the wind. Thou causest me to ride upon it, and dissolvest my substance. For I know that thou wilt bring me to death, and to the house appointed for all living. Howbeit he will not stretch out his hand to the grave, though they cry in his destruction. Did not I weep for him that was in trouble? Was not my soul grieved for the poor? When I looked for good, then evil came unto me, and when I waited for light, there came darkness. My bowels boiled and rested not. The days of affliction prevented me. I went mourning without the sun. I stood up and I cried in the congregation. I am a brother to dragons, and a companion to owls. My skin is black upon me. My bones are burned with heat. My harp is also turned to mourning, and my organ to the voice of them that weep. So this is a sharp contrast between 29 to 30 of Job in his viewing and his current standing. And the important thing that I picked out from this was that Job said that God had turned his strong hand against him, and that as he cried out, he did not hear him, and as he stood up, he did not regard him. Job is saying that in this moment, God has abandoned him. He's saying that you don't care for me anymore. You're turning your back against me. You're not seeing me. You're not hearing me. You have actively gone against me. He's attributing evil to God in this moment. And we know, benefit of hindsight, benefit of being the outside perspective, that we know that it is Satan that is doing this, and that God is allowing it to happen for a lesson. There's a million lessons in Job. Take whichever one works for you right now. I'm not saying that mine is the final. I'm just saying this is what I got from it. But it's these things that really angers God. And it's interesting that God hasn't spoken yet, but when he does speak, it's very sudden, very direct, and very aggressive. Because he is, any time that we see God responding to someone or something, we see that God does it even more so. We know that the 10 plagues were a mockery of the Egyptian gods. And we see that every time that God does something, he does it in a way that makes his opposition seem foolish, if that makes sense. And so when God comes and he begins to speak to Job, he speaks in a way that seems very demeaning and minusculing of Job, because he's trying to reiterate the fact that Job does not know everything. He points to these things because Job and his friends are speaking falsities against God. Go a little bit further. So then we have a fourth friend that kind of makes an appearance named Elihu. And we don't read where Elihu comes from. We just read that he's young and he's held his peace this whole time. He wasn't one of the original three, so we can either say he came in after the fact, like maybe one of the days after they've already been talking, or he wasn't on the same status as the others. Maybe he was like a servant of, I don't know. But Elihu begins to speak, and Elihu is a very good example of, well, he's just different. So let's read about it. So these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. So Job's been responding back and forth, and Job has finally kind of answered all of their rebuttals, and he's kind of left them speechless. Now, I don't know if this is speechless because he's such a good debater, or if this is speechless because they're just sick of repeating themselves over and over. These three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then was kindled the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, of the kindred of Ram. Against Job was his wrath kindled, because he justified himself rather than God. So remember earlier whenever I said that Job had kind of set out an ultimatum of if God was truly finding fault in him, and if he had sinned, then he wanted God's judgment to be on him, and since God wasn't judging him, then that must mean that he must not have sinned, and therefore what's happening to him was God like mistreating him. That's kind of what Elihu is picking up on here, because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his three friends was his wrath kindled, because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. So now he's upset because the three men that had been talking to Job were just letting Job say these things against God, and they weren't responding to it. So he's mad at everybody. He's also very young. Now Elihu had waited till Job had spoken, because they were elder than he. When Elihu saw there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, then was his wrath kindled. And Elihu, the son of Barachel of the Buzite, answered and said, I am young, and ye are very old, wherefore I was afraid, and durst not show you mine opinion. So right off the bat, we see that Elihu is a respectable person. We see that he, again, like the other three, have good intentions. He is willing to wait and let the elder speak first before he gives his opinion. I said, days should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth them understanding. Great men are not always wise, neither do the aged understand judgment. You can go ahead and write that one down and keep that in your back pocket for later. I'm sure that you'll find the right time to use that verse, 32:9, whenever you need it. Therefore I said, hearken to me, I also will show mine opinion. Important emphasis on the fact he said opinion. So from this point forward, he's not saying that this is the written in stone commandments of God. This is what he has seen. This is what he has come to the conclusion of. This is Elihu's opinion. Behold, I waited for your words. I gave ear to your reasons, whilst ye searched out what to say. Yea, I attended unto you, and behold, there was none of you that convinced Job, or that answered his words. Lest ye should say, we have found out wisdom. God thrusteth him down, not man. Now he hath not directed his words against me, neither will I answer him with your speeches. They were amazed. They answered no more. They left off speaking. Elihu's telling the guys, he didn't listen to you guys, so I'm not going to just repeat the same things you've been repeating, and he wasn't really speaking to me. So I'm just going to say what it is I feel I need to say. When I had waited, for they spake not, but stood still and answered no more, I said, I will answer also my part. I also will show mine opinion. For I am full of matter. The spirit within me constraineth me. Behold, my belly is as wine which hath no vent. It is ready to burst like new bottles. I will speak that I may be refreshed. I will open my lips and answer. Let me not, I pray you, accept any man's person, neither let me give flattering titles unto man. For I know not to give flattering titles. In so doing, my Maker would soon take me away. So Elihu is prefacing what he's about to say in that he's like, first off, I've been back here ready to bust. And I can speak from experience. There have been many times where I've wanted to say something and it's been all I could do to hold it in for the time. And I'm sure it reminds me of whenever Philip's back behind the camera and there's something he wants to say and he has to like come out here to be able to say that. It's that kind of feeling. But he's waited this whole time. So he's getting this all out of the way. I'm not going to repeat what you guys are saying. I'm just going to say what the spirit within me has kind of commanded me to say in here. Wherefore, Job, I pray thee, hear my speeches, and hearken to all my words. Behold, now I have opened my mouth, my tongue hath spoken in my mouth. My words shall be of the uprightness of my heart, my lips shall utter knowledge clearly. The Spirit of God hath made me, and the breath of the Almighty hath given me life. If thou canst answer me, set thy words in order before me. Stand up. Behold, I am according to thy wish in God's stead. I also am formed out of the clay. Now, this is where things get dangerous. Because now, okay, Elihu is saying he's speaking for God. Job, Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar were saying that they were speaking of what they knew of God. Elihu's taking on and saying that he's speaking for God. Nobody's right in this. Elihu's getting kind of dangerous. Behold, my terror shall not make thee afraid, neither shall my hand be heavy upon thee. Surely thou hast spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the voice of thy words, saying, I am clean without transgression. I am innocent, neither is there iniquity in me. Behold, he findeth occasions against me, he counteth me for his enemy. He putteth my feet in the stocks, he marketh all my paths. Behold, in this thou art not just. I will answer thee, that God is greater than man. Why dost thou strive against him? For he giveth not account of any of his matters. For God speaketh once, yea, twice, yet man perceiveth it not. In a dream and a vision of the night, when deep sleep falleth upon men, and slumberings upon the bed, then he openeth the ears of men, and sealeth their instruction, that he may withdraw man from his purpose, and hide pride from man. He keepeth back his soul from the pit, his life from perishing by the sword. He is chastened also with pain upon his bed, and the multitude of his bones with strong pain, so that his life abhorreth bread, and his soul dainty meat. His flesh is consumed away, that it cannot be seen, and his bones that were not seen stick out. Yea, his soul draweth near unto the grave, and his life to the destroyers. If there be a messenger with him, an interpreter, one among 1,000, to show unto man his uprightness, then he is gracious unto him, and saith, Deliver him from going down to the pit, I have found a ransom. His flesh shall be fresher than a child's, he shall return to the days of his youth. He shall pray unto God, and he will be favorable unto him. He shall see his face for joy, for he will render unto man righteousness. He looked upon men, and if any say, I have sinned and perverted that which was right, and it profiteth me not, he will deliver his soul from going into the pit, and his life shall see the light. Lo, all these things worketh God, oftentimes with man, to bring back his soul from the pit, to be enlightened with the light of the living. Mark well, O Job, hearken unto me, hold thy peace, and I will speak. If thou hast anything to say, answer me, speak, for I desire to justify thee. If not, hearken unto me, hold thy peace, and I shall teach thee wisdom. So, sorry, I am not used to reading this much here. Elihu begins to speak to Job, and he's speaking on behalf of God, and he's setting out, just like the other guys, there's a lot of things he's saying that is true, there's a lot of things that he's saying that is just not true, these false ideas of God. He really brings home the point that God is just, God is righteous, and everything that God does is God. It's sovereign, it's good. Where he's getting crossed is that he is still laying on that God is punishing Job for something, and he is taking on the mantle of really speaking on behalf of God. It's very interesting later whenever God actually speaks to Job and he speaks about his friends, he tells him to pray for his three friends, but he does not mention Elihu, which kind of, again, leads me to believe that maybe maybe Elihu's not in the same category as the friends, or maybe he was speaking for God at this point. I don't know. But Elihu speaks, and he gives by far the longest direct speech in the book of Job. It covers multiple chapters without ceasing. And this is the very weird part about this. So he goes and goes and goes all the way to the end of 37, and he's really hammering this stuff down. And the more he speaks, the more his pride begins to take hold. It's very funny because he talks to Job, and he mentions how it's like Job's pride that's keeping him from repenting in this, and then he begins to again reiterate that he's speaking for God and that he is speaking the truth of God. But then out of nowhere, we don't read about a storm that's coming up. We don't read about a great thundering that's happening. We don't know what the weather's like. Elihu didn't mention it. Whoever recorded this didn't mention the weather. But in 38, we finally get the answer to the question. And I imagine that every party involved is petrified in this moment. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge?" And that, my friends, is the entire point of Job to me. This is what I got out of it. It wasn't a make sure everybody knows that they've sinned. It wasn't a how to be a good or a bad comforter in times. It wasn't how to follow your redemption arc. It is that who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Do not speak on God's behalf without knowing God. Don't speak for God. Don't speak truths of God. Don't start proselytizing things that are not of God that are your opinions. I've been guilty of this. I believe that we all have at one point or another. I cannot stress this enough. We cannot make the claim that what we believe is what God actually says if it's just our opinion. Now, we can preface things by saying, I don't have Bible on this. I'm not for sure. I don't have biblical record. God's not told me this directly. This is my opinion. This is how I read it. All of those things are fine. But as soon as we start laying down God's law from our opinion, to me, that is the moral of Job. Because every person, Job, Elihu, Bildad, Zophar, the other one, Eliphaz, they all attribute false things to God. Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Terrifying. Because God is speaking to this group. He's speaking to Job, but you know the fellas around him have to hear this. He says, you need to get yourself ready. Gird up your loins like a man is get ready. Tie that dress up, get ready to run, because you're going to have to answer for what you've said. And God begins to speak to his own sovereignty. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy, those are angels. Or who shut up the sea with doors, when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and brake up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it? It is turned as clay to the seal. They stand as a garment. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in search of the depth? So the rest of 38 is God speaking on heavenly bodies and earthly matters and these big miraculous scientific things. And he's asking Job in a very mocking way, because God mocks the people that are against him. And when you speak false truths to God, you're speaking against God. And so he lays out all these magnificent things. Where were you when I created the earth is essentially what I get from it. And he lays this out very clearly, and of course Job doesn't have an answer. In 39, God goes a little bit further. Knowest thou the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth, or canst thou mark when the hinds do calve? Canst thou number the months that they fulfill, or knowest thou the time when they bring forth? They bow themselves, they bring forth their young ones, they cast out their sorrows. Their young ones are in good liking, they grow up with corn, they go forth and return not unto them. Who hath sent out the wild ass free, or who hath loosed the bands of the wild ass? Whose house have I made the wilderness, and the barren land his dwellings? He scorneth the multitude of the city, neither regardeth he the crying of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searcheth for every green thing. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him because his strength is great, or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him that he will bring home thy seed and gather it into thy barn? Gavest thou the goodly wings unto the peacocks, or wings and feathers unto the ostrich, which leaveth her eggs in the earth, and warmeth them in dust, and forgetteth that the foot may crush them, that the wild beast may break them? She is hardened against her young ones, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear, because God hath deprived her of wisdom, neither hath he imparted to her understanding. What time she lifteth up herself on high, she scorneth the horse and his rider. Hast thou given the horse strength? Hast thou clothed his neck with thunder? Canst thou make him afraid as a grasshopper? The glory of his nostrils is terrible. He paweth in the valley, and rejoiceth in his strength. He goeth on to meet the armed men. He mocketh at fear, and is not affrighted, neither turneth he back from the sword. The quiver rattleth against him, the glittering spear and the shield. He swallowed the ground with fierceness and rage. Neither believes he that it is the sound of the trumpet. He saith among the trumpets, Ha ha! And he smelleth the battle afar off, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. Doth the hawk fly by thy wisdom, and stretch her wings toward the south? Doth the eagle mount up at the high command, and make her nest on high? She dwelleth and abideth on the rock, upon the crag of the rock, in the strong place. From thence she seeketh the prey, and her eyes behold afar off. Her young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there is she. So God goes from universe creation to life creation, and he goes through these animals that Job would have been very familiar with. And unicorn is a mistranslation that the King James did for rhinoceros, because the only word that they had for it at the time was monochronos, which means one horn. And when you translate that through languages, it comes to unicorn. So that's where we got unicorns from, by the way. Lisa Frank, the woman that did all the rainbow art stuff on kids' notebooks back in the day, she could thank the King James Bible for that. But he goes through and he gives these specific examples, and he talks about different birds and animals and all these things. And he even goes as far in that 30, her young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there is she. He's saying that I have set all of these things in orchestration to work exactly as they work. I taught the ostrich how to lay her eggs and bury it in the sand. I'm the one that freed the animals. I'm the ones that gave the calves to the hinds. I'm the one that set all this down there. I'm the one that told these scavenger birds to follow battles so that they can clean up the mess. Do you know why I believe that there are scavenger animals out there? Because if everything just died and laid there, diseases would spread and people would get sick. Scavenger animals clean up those things. So when great battles happen, the birds would flock down and they would eat the corpses of the men and the animals that were slain there. I believe fully because God found a way and wanted a way to have this ecosystem thrive without having a big pile of rotting corpses out there. Anyways, he's saying not only did I create the heavens and the earth, but I created all these small intricate details with that. You know, I think about like the human body, and I think about like the nervous system and the musculoskeletal system, the cardiac system, the endocrine system, and all these different small cell parts that millions upon millions upon millions of cell interactions within our body every second, and all of that somehow relates into us being a living, breathing, thinking, feeling human being. God does the big and the small. And that's what he's saying. And finally, Job gets a chance to answer here in 40. Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, Shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it. So God lays all this out here, and he says, if you've got so much to say, if you know so much better than me, then let's hear it, big boy. Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay mine hand upon my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. I love Job right here, because Job is terrified. And I imagine his friends are terrified, but he's speaking to Job. So Job answers, he says, I am vile. He's immediately coming out the gate, not trying to defend himself. He is immediately assured that he is the lowest of the low, and he is humbling himself before God. And he said, yes, I have spoken. Yes, I have. He says, twice I have spoken against thee, but now I will hold my peace. He says, I can't deny and say I didn't say those things. I can't lie to you and say that I messed up. You've kind of already established that you're aware of what I've said. So he says, yes, I have, but I will say no more. You understand that whenever you go to repent to God, when you go to talk to God, when you go to pray, whenever you go to reveal yourself to God, you're not really revealing yourself to Him. You're not telling God things that He doesn't know. You are simply coming to the same conclusion and admitting it. God doesn't need to hear every single sentence of what's wrong and what you've done wrong, because He already knows. He needs you to hear it. He needs you to understand what it is that you've done wrong. He doesn't condemn Job for what he said there. He just wants to make sure that he is aware of what he said. And so God goes again and begins to answer. And so now it's from, here's what I have done, to how insignificant you are. And he references these great number of animals, but he references the behemoth. And I'm not here to talk about it today, but whatever the behemoth is, it's big and it's powerful and it is untamable. And he references that, and he asks Job essentially, can you contend with the behemoth? No, you can't. That's funny, because I made the behemoth. I am so much greater than it. But if that were not enough, almost the entirety of chapter 41, I would say the entirety of chapter 41 is about Leviathan. Don't care what Leviathan really is. It sounds like a dragon to me because it has scales, breathes fire, and is like impenetrable to weaponry. But here's the point. Job evidently knew what it was. But God tells Job that you can't catch it with a hook. You can't put a spear in its belly. You can't pull it up on land. You can't cut it up and feed families. You can't try to tame it. You can't wrestle with it. You can't even harm it. But I am in total control of it. I really like that in these 4 chapters here, God is hammering down just how God He is and how insignificant man is. It's a very important lesson for us all to remember. If you ever start to feel like you've got it figured out, just read those verses and ask those questions as if God was asking them to you, and you'll find that you are insignificant. But God loves you anyways. So then we have 42, the closing of Job, and here is where it all kind of ties together. Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore have I uttered that I understood not, things too wonderful for me, which I knew not. See, here Job isn't saying like, oh, here's this big list of sins. He understands that his big issue here is the fact that he spoke without knowing what he was saying. He tried to attribute his thoughts and opinions to God. Hear, I beseech thee, and I will speak. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself, and repent in dust and ashes. And it was so, that after the Lord had spoken these words unto Job, the Lord turned to Eliphaz the Temanite. My wrath is kindled against thee, and against thy 2 friends, for ye have not spoken of me the thing that is right, as my servant Job hath. Now, all of the men mentioned, including Elihu, who is no longer mentioned, all spoke falsely against God and attributed false things to God. But God's wrath is only kindled against the 3 friends. Wonder why? Because Job realized his mistake and repented in that moment. Now, we don't know that the friends never got a chance to repent. We don't know that they didn't want to. We don't know what happened. But we do know that in this moment, God's wrath was against them because they had not repented. But Job had. Therefore take unto you now 7 bullocks and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering. And my servant Job shall pray for you. For him will I accept, lest I deal with you after your folly, in that ye have not spoken of me the thing which is right, like my servant Job. Also important to note that Job was perfect and upright before this. He was in good standing with God before this. We don't read that about his friends. We don't read that they weren't, but we don't read that they were. So there's a good chance that God's wrath was kindled because they were speaking against his man as well as himself. That's just conjecture. That's opinion. I don't know that for a fact. So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did according as the Lord commanded them, and the Lord also accepted Job. And the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. Also the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came there unto him all his brethren and all his sisters and all that had been his acquaintance before, and did eat bread with him in his house. And they bemoaned him and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. Every man also gave him a piece of money, and every one an earring of gold. So the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he called the name of the first Jemimah, the name of the second Keziah, and the name of the third Kerinhapuk. And in all the land were no women found so fair as the daughters of Job, and their father gave them inheritance among their brethren. After this lived Job 140 years, saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. So Job died, being old and full of days. So we see that all that was lost of Job was returned to him in greater numbers. Of course, he did still lose children, but God did give him other children, and we have to trust that since Job had been making sacrifices for them, that they got to go to the equivalent of Abraham's bosom. The important thing here is not to take away that if we suffer, God is going to double everything that we've lost, because that is dangerously close to prosperity gospel, and that is just as bad theology as bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people. The important thing to take away from is that God is faithful to us when we are faithful to him, and that at no point in our lives can we ever assume to speak on God's behalf unless God has directly told us through his word. It is very dangerous to speak out of turn on that. It is very dangerous to come up with newfangled ideas of the faith that haven't been given by God. There's a big difference in our emotion and our opinion and God's true word. So that was my study of Job. I did not think that I would actually speak an hour and 17 minutes on this. Hopefully that wasn't awful and you actually picked up what I was putting down on there. That's just my study. I don't know how much different that is from the last time we talked about Job, but that doesn't have to be the end-all be-all. That's just what God was showing me this go-around. I may read it again and get something completely different from that. But just be careful what we attribute with false motives. I appreciate you all. Savannah, thank you for hopping on here and talking with me today. I'm sure if we didn't have kids, you could have sat in here in person with me and spoken, but I don't think they would have let that happen very well. I love you all. Thank you all for joining me today. If you want to have the podcast out, the greatest thing that you can do for us is not give us money, but is to give us attention on here. That sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? All that these social media platforms, all they care about is interaction. They want to see comments, they want to see likes, they want to see subscriptions, follows, whatever the social media platform equivalent is that you're watching. And that's not so that we can feel good about ourselves. That's not so our guests can feel good about themselves. That is strictly just because the more people that see this, the more people get this same opportunity to hear this different side of God that maybe they didn't hear in their regular church, and to hear the insights that God may have given to us, and a better chance for them to hear some of the great testimonies that we've had on here before. The only reason we ever acquire testimonies is to try and help people out so they feel like they're not the only ones that have been there. Because everybody has their individual story, but there's nothing new under the sun. There's always someone that's gone through something similar, and regardless, everyone needs to be redeemed by Christ and can be redeemed by Christ. That's the message here. I love you, God bless you, and thank you so much.